Welcome back to Whispered Chronicles, where shadows linger and dark tales come to life. Tonight, we take you deep into the heart of a mystery steeped in vengeance, betrayal, and the supernatural. This is the story of Blackwood Manor, a place where the past refuses to die, and where those who dare to enter may never return. Settle in as we unveil the haunting of Blackwood Manor. Blackwood Manor was once the grandest estate in the region, built in the late 19th century by the wealthy industrialist, William Blackwood. Its towering walls and sprawling grounds spoke of power and influence, but behind its grand facade lay secrets, dark and terrible secrets. The locals spoke of strange occurrences, of whispers in the night and shadows that moved on their own. But the Blackwood family paid no heed. They believed themselves untouchable, secure in their wealth and status, until tragedy struck. Margaret Blackwood, William's only daughter, was the jewel of the manor, beloved by all. But beneath her beauty and grace, she harbored a sadness known only to those closest to her. You see, Margaret had fallen in love with a man deemed unworthy by her father, a humble servant, Edward. Their love was pure, but in the eyes of William Blackwood, it was a stain on the family name. And so, one fateful night, Edward disappeared, leaving Margaret heartbroken and alone. She retreated into herself, her once bright spirit dimming until, one night, she too vanished. Margaret's disappearance was the beginning of the end for the Blackwood family. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said she had eloped with Edward, others whispered that she had taken her own life, unable to bear the grief. But those who lived closest to the manor knew the truth. Blackwood Manor was cursed. The once vibrant estate fell into decay as William Blackwood grew increasingly paranoid. He would speak of seeing Margaret's ghost wandering the halls, her eyes filled with a rage that chilled him to the bone. Servants fled, the grounds became overrun with weeds, and the manor was shrouded in an oppressive gloom. Yet, no one dared to speak of the curse openly, for fear that they too would fall victim to the wrath of the Blackwood spirits. Years passed, and Blackwood Manor became the stuff of legend, a place avoided by all, except for the most foolhardy or desperate. Those who ventured too close spoke of hearing voices, of cold fingers brushing against their skin, and of the unmistakable feeling that they were being watched. And then, the deaths began. Meet Thomas Blackwood, a distant relative of the Blackwood family, who has come into possession of Blackwood Manor. Thomas is a descendant of one of William Blackwood's siblings, making him a distant cousin rather than a direct descendant. After the death of William Blackwood and the disappearance of his only daughter, Margaret, the manor fell into disrepair and was eventually passed down through distant branches of the family. Thomas, having grown up away from the manor, has now inherited it and is determined to restore the manor to its former glory, to erase the stain of the past and make Blackwood Manor a home once more. He had heard the stories, of course, but he dismissed them as superstitions, relics of a bygone era. But as Thomas began his work, the shadows of Blackwood Manor stirred. He would find things out of place, hear soft whispers just out of earshot, and see fleeting glimpses of figures in the corners of his vision. At first, he told himself it was just his imagination, the effects of being alone in such a large, empty house. But as the days turned into weeks, the presence grew stronger, more insistent. And then, one night, Thomas discovered something that would change everything. Hidden behind the walls of the library, Thomas found a room that had been forgotten by time. The air was thick with dust, and the only light came from a single, flickering candle on an old wooden table. But what caught Thomas's eye was the journal lying open on the table, its pages yellowed with age. It was Margaret's diary, filled with her thoughts, her fears, and her heartache. And as Thomas read, he learned the truth about what had happened all those years ago. Margaret had never eloped, nor had she taken her own life. She had been murdered by her own father, William Blackwood. Margaret's spirit had grown stronger over the years, fueled by the pain and suffering of all those who had crossed the threshold of Blackwood Manor. And with her, the spirits of those who had died under the curse. Former servants, family members, and even Edward had taken on a life of their own, twisted by the darkness that had consumed the house. As Thomas uncovered Margaret's remains, the temperature in the room plummeted. The walls seemed to close in, and a faint, mournful wail echoed through the air. The spirits had awakened, and they were not pleased. Thomas could feel their anger, their desire for vengeance, and he knew that they saw him as no different from his ancestors. The spirits began to close in, their whispers growing louder, more frantic. They wanted justice, retribution for the wrongs that had been done to them, and Thomas, the last of the Blackwoods, was the one who would pay the price. But as the spirits drew closer, something unexpected happened. One of the figures stepped forward, a young man with a kind face and sorrowful eyes. It was Edward. He reached out to Thomas, and in that moment, the truth was revealed. Margaret had loved Edward, yes, but there was more to their story. Edward had been the one to convince Margaret to stay at the manor, to confront her father and fight for their love. But when William discovered them, it was not out of shame or anger that he acted. It was out of greed. You see, the Blackwood family was not always the powerful and influential dynasty they became. In his youth, William came from a humble and impoverished background. His family struggled to make ends meet, living in modest conditions far from the grandeur that Blackwood Manor would later embody. Determined to escape the grip of poverty, William worked tirelessly, seizing every opportunity to advance his status. Through sheer determination and relentless effort, he built a successful business, amassing wealth and influence that would eventually lead him to acquire Blackwood Manor. But as William's wealth and power grew, so did his fears. The specter of losing it all haunted him, leading him to make a dark and fateful decision. In his quest to safeguard his newfound prosperity and ensure the Blackwood name endured, William turned to the Shadow Warden, an ancient entity known for its power over fate and fortune. The Shadow Warden was reputed to grant immense power and prosperity to those who made a pact with it. However, such deals came with a grave cost. The pact required the sacrifice of a person connected to the Blackwood family, twice a year. The stronger the connection, the greater the power bestowed. It began with the killing of servants who worked for the family, but soon, William's greed got the better of him. He started killing his friends and in-laws, driven by the promise of greater power. When William discovered Margaret's continued correspondence with Edward, the weight of shame was unbearable. But then, a heinous thought crossed his mind. Stronger the connection, better the results. He murdered his own daughter in cold blood, sealing her fate within the walls of the manor. But that was not all. William had hidden her body within the manor's walls, sealing it away in the very room where Thomas now stood. The curse of Blackwood Manor was not born of superstition, but of vengeance. Margaret's spirit had been trapped in the house, bound by the injustice done to her. And now, she was not alone. Edward, too, had become a part of this twisted curse, bound to the manor just as Margaret was. And now, he sought to break the cycle. He pleaded with Thomas to leave the manor, to let the past remain buried, and to escape the fate that had claimed so many before him. But Thomas was torn. How could he leave, knowing the truth, knowing that the spirits were trapped in a cycle of pain and vengeance? In a moment of terrifying clarity, Thomas understood. The spirits weren't simply seeking revenge. They were trying to break free from the curse. But Margaret, consumed by the darkness and the betrayal she felt from both her father and her lover, had become something far more malevolent. Her love had turned into a hatred so powerful that it bound the other spirits to her will. And now, she intended to claim Thomas as her final act of vengeance. For in her eyes, Thomas was the embodiment of the Blackwood legacy, and the cycle would not end until he, too, was trapped within the walls of the manor. As Margaret's icy hand reached for him, Thomas felt the overwhelming pull of her anger and sorrow. He could feel his own was slipping away, his strength fading. But then, in a final desperate act, Edward intervened. With all the force he could muster, Edward turned to Margaret, his voice filled with a sorrow that cut through the darkness. He reminded her of their love, of the plans they had made, and of the person she once was. For a moment, the rage in Margaret's eyes flickered, and her hand wavered. Edward's words broke through the veil of anger that had consumed Margaret for so long. Her grip on the other spirits loosened, and the room seemed to grow lighter, as if the very air had been cleansed. But Margaret was not free, not yet. There was one final act she needed to perform, one that would determine the fate of everyone in the manor. Margaret looked into Thomas's eyes, and for the first time, he saw the woman she had once been, a woman who had loved deeply and suffered immensely. She whispered a single word, "Forgive." It was a plea, not just to Thomas, but to herself, to Edward, and to the house that had become her prison. In that moment, Margaret's spirit began to dissolve, her form disintegrating into a fine mist that slowly dissipated into the air. The other spirits followed, their tortured souls finally finding peace. The curse was broken. With the curse lifted, Blackwood Manor was finally at peace. Thomas stood in the quiet, empty halls, the weight of the past heavy on his shoulders. But the air was lighter now, free from the darkness that had plagued the house for so long. He knew he could leave, that he was free to live his life away from the shadows of his ancestors. But as he turned to leave, he noticed something strange, a faint whisper, a soft breath on the back of his neck. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. In the silence, he heard it again, a voice, faint but unmistakable. It was Margaret. Her spirit had not fully departed. Though the curse was lifted, a part of her remained, bound to the manor. But she was no longer the malevolent force she once was. Her voice was soft, pleading, as she asked Thomas to stay, to keep the house from falling into ruin once more. And as the realization dawned on him, Thomas felt a cold shiver run down his spine. For he knew, in that moment, that the house would never truly let him go. And so, Thomas Blackwood became the new guardian of Blackwood Manor, bound by blood and by spirit to a house that would forever be haunted by its past. The story of Blackwood Manor is not one of good or evil, but of the choices we make and the legacies we leave behind. For in the end, no one truly escapes the ghosts of their past. Do you believe in curses, or are they just stories to keep us awake at night? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more haunting stories and chilling mysteries. Until next time, remember, some spirits never truly rest.